Well, good morning. Glad to be back with you guys today. I hope you had a great spring break with your kiddos, whether you were at home or traveling. I hope you had a good week last week, but I am so glad to see you back today. Next week, we're going to end our marriage series with an interview with Jeff and Stacy Kemp. Stacy's been one of our leaders in here for many years, and she and her husband Jeff are going to come, and we're just going to answer a bunch of questions. We're just going to have a conversation up here, and so I would love for you to be able to submit your questions. So you can do that today if you can, so I can get those wrapped up and get those to Jeff and Stacy. You can send those through your leader. You can text me. You can text the Bloom number. However you want to do that. But I thought that as we're talking about our last roadblock, because we're going to change gears a little bit with Jeff and Stacy next week, I just thought we might start today by just kind of looking back at the topics that we have covered in this series. We began this series by acknowledging that marriage is hard. It takes a lot of work. A lot of times we come into it thinking that it's going to be the fairy tale and what we see on TV, and we quickly, sometimes, some others of us maybe not quite so quickly, but eventually you find out that marriage is tough and it takes a lot of work. And we talked about the purpose for marriage, that it's not for our happiness. And you may remember that Paul Tripp says that the purpose of marriage is to push us to the end of ourselves. Yay. To push us to the end of ourselves and our way, and towards God and His way. And then we covered the roadblocks of pride, the roadblock of our expectations, the roadblock of our own past, even our husband's past, and how that plays into our marriage relationship, and then our fear. And I don't know exactly where you are in your marriage, but I do know where you are in your season of life. And you may have tried to deal with some of these issues in your marriage, and maybe you haven't had much success. Maybe the things that you've tried haven't really been working. And when that happens, after a while, we can get to the point of thinking, I just can't do this anymore. This just isn't what I thought it would be. We've just drifted apart, and I just don't think I love him anymore. And I mean, I'll stay for the kids, but I'm pretty much just checking out because this just isn't worth it, and I really don't even care anymore. And you begin to feel this way, and then you think about trying to implement some of the things that we have been talking about, but at the same time, you're drowning in one of the most physically demanding seasons of your life. And you may be feeling overwhelmed. And sometimes when we feel overwhelmed, our reaction to that is to just shut down. And what that leads to is a feeling of apathy. And we can find ourselves stuck in this state of apathy, and that's the final roadblock that we want to talk about today. Because apathy is characterized by feelings of indifference and a lack of emotion. Have you ever just felt that way where you're just flat? You just don't really care anymore about anything. Being apathetic means that you're no longer motivated, and you might show some of these signs. Lacking the effort or energy to do everyday things. Now that can also come from being awake all night with your newborn. You might depend on other people to plan any kind of activity or anything for you to do besides the immediate demands that you have to complete. If you're stuck in a state of apathy, you may not have any desire to learn new things or to have new experiences. You tend to not care about your own problems, and you feel no emotion when good or bad things happen. And I don't know if any of that resonates with you. Maybe you're in a great place right now, and you're in a great season right now, but maybe you're in that place where you just kind of feel like throwing in the towel. And if you're feeling that, first of all, I want you to know you're not alone. If I had you raise your hands, if we could close our eyes, I don't know, I grew up in the Baptist church, where you close your eyes and you raise your hand at the end of the service. If I had you do that, I guarantee you there would be a lot of people in here who raise their hands and say, I feel that, either right now or at some point or another. So I want you to know that you're not alone, and what I want to encourage you to do is to invite someone into that. You don't have to come up here and tell everybody, but tell somebody. Invite somebody in to walk that journey with you. I want to remind you of our care team. Take a picture of this slide if you want to. Remember, you don't have to go to church here. There's no cost. Stephen and Arana that you have met up here before are two of the best people that I know in my entire universe. And I know some good people. And I want to encourage you to reach out to them individually or as a couple. And if you're not feeling that way today, maybe you're in a good season, I want to say, praise God. Be excited, recognize that. Because you've either worked really hard to be in that good place, or, and I don't mean to be discouraging, I'm just trying to be real here, you just haven't gotten there yet. Because those hard days and those hard seasons are a part of relationship. And so you probably have those days in your future. And I don't say that to discourage you, but to encourage you that that to an extent that is a normal thing. Because you are a human being and your husband is a human being in a broken world, and that's just how life goes until we're no longer on this earth one day. And Jesus makes all things perfect. And so sometimes we have to work through difficult seasons. And in those times, we can begin to question, is this worth it or not? And I want you to know that there are days that you're going to feel that. And while it is a red flag that you need to be working on something and paying attention to something, it is not abnormal. Here's the thing about apathy. It can be a dangerous place because there's nothing obviously wrong. It happens kind of slowly, and sometimes we don't even realize it because there's no alarm going off to alert us to any trouble. It's kind of like drifting in the current at the beach. You can go out on a raft with a friend or a kid or your husband, and you can float out there, and then all of a sudden you look up a few minutes later and you've moved way down the beach. You didn't do anything. You just drifted down, far away from where you expected to be. And so I want to take a minute and talk about some things that cause us to get to this place of being overwhelmed and apathetic. And then we're going to talk about some action steps that we can take to combat it. So what are some of the things in our life that contribute to this? Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I want to just throw a few things out for you to be aware of. First of all, just the day-to-day grind. Having to keep your people alive. I've probably said this to you before, but Chuck learned when the kids were little, he used to come home and ask, what did y'all do today? And finally I was like, I have no idea. But I know that I've been here all day with these 3 children and I haven't sat down all day. But I have no idea what we did. So he learned to ask, how was your day? Much better question. But just the day-to-day keeps you distracted and busy with other things because the kids have to be fed. They have to be parented. They have to be cared for. And so time and connection with your husband who can hopefully feed himself and dress himself and take himself to the bathroom and do all the things himself, it feels like he can survive on his own and you've got to focus on the kids. And so we miss out on that time and connection with each other. The second thing is stress. And when I say stress, I'm talking about above and beyond what we just talked about. So hard times, situations that arise and cause added stress. And a lot of times we have a different stress response than our husband has. And so instead of moving together, that stress causes us to move into our own defense mechanisms, and we actually move apart and away from each other. And when you're in survival mode in stressful times, you can pick up some relational habits that are not healthy, and it's hard to get out of those. That might be the fact that you have a child with special needs, or maybe you have a child who has a short-term but a serious illness. Maybe you have a job loss or a job change. Maybe you move. Maybe you have conflict with parents or in-laws or a difficult teenager or the death of someone close to you. Like the list goes on, and they can all leave you overwhelmed to where you're functioning in survival mode instead of thriving in your relationship. The next thing is just a lack of intentional connection. I mean, I don't know about you, but when it's past 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock and your husband rolls in the door, I am tired. Like, I don't have anything left to give. But it can also be the things that we've talked about, fear or pride that keeps us from connecting, from being vulnerable and intentionally connecting with our husbands. Keeping our true thoughts and feelings hidden doesn't lead to connection, it leads to isolation. Or maybe you've been trying to connect, but you're not getting much of a response from your husband. And you get to the point where you're just kind of passing in the hallway, like roommates more than husband and wife. Maybe you actually have some unresolved conflict in your relationship. How we handle conflict is extremely important. And we talked about this in week 1, and so if you missed that, I would really encourage you to go back and listen to that week where we talked about pride and how that plays into our marital relationship and the way that we resolve conflict. Because if you're letting conflict go or you're only partly resolving it, it adds up. Just like interest on your credit card bill. You know, if you go and spend $1,000 on your credit card and then you don't spend anything else, what happens? Do you owe $1,000? No, you owe more than $1,000, and it increases over time unless you actively work to resolve that debt. It's the same thing in your marriage. That conflict doesn't just go away. The heat of the emotion may go away, but the conflict is still there, and that debt is still there, and you've got to resolve it, or it continues to grow. And when we're not dealing well with conflict and things get hard, what we tend to do is gravitate towards the easier relationships in our life that don't have that conflict. So we move away from our husbands. We move towards our kids, maybe. We move towards our friends. Maybe it's your mom or another older woman that you have in your life. And we begin to make those the relationships that we're investing in and that we're close in. And I could keep going with a longer list, but when we experience some of these things over a period of time, they take their toll, don't they? And we gradually get overwhelmed and we get worn out. And so the question is, what are we going to do when we're in this state? How do we recover if we're stuck in this place of apathy? First, it's crucial that we understand this, that we don't ever drift towards health. You have to fight for it. But the problem is you're already maxed out, right? You're fighting all the battles on all fronts. You don't have any other energy to fight. And so today, I don't want to lay a bunch of extra things on you to do. I don't want to just increase your load of, well, you should be doing this, and you should be having a date night every week with your husband, and you should be, looking him in the eye every time he walks in from the door. Like, I don't want to give you a long list of things today. I want to simplify things for us today. But I want to give you this analogy that we're going to kind of keep in mind as we talk through this. I want you to think about your marriage like a bank account. You can't just spend, right? Now you can, and this is kind of the mindset of my middle child. thankfully, I'm set up, sort of thankfully, I'm set up to where if her account gets below a certain balance, I get a text. So I want to read you this little text exchange between us one day, because I had gotten 2 texts that her bank account had gone negative. And I said, hey, do you have alerts set up on your bank account for when your balance gets low or overdrawn? If not, you should. You should set those up. Here is the text stream that I got back from her. Oh dear. And because I sent her a picture of the overdrawn amounts. She said, oh dear, I didn't know that I could do that. You'll have to show me how to set those up. And then she said, I just spend money until my card declines. LOL. I forget it can go negative. Sorry. I was like, yeah, we have some work to do in training you. Somewhere we missed a few things. But your marriage is the same way. You can't continue in this state where you're just apathetic and you don't care. Because what happens is you're slowly spending that account of your marriage, and it's getting down to the point where either you have zero or you begin to move into a negative balance relationally. Now, Annie, I shouldn't have put her name in here, and I know who it is, but if you know my kids, it's not hard to guess. Annie likes to frequently say, man, I just need to win the lottery. And I'm like, yeah, don't we all? Like, we all want that. But the reality is, as a general rule, money doesn't just appear in our laps. And it's the same thing in our relationships. Our relational capital doesn't just magically replenish itself, but we can make deposits into that account. But here's the thing, I want you to think about, when do you go to the bank to make a deposit? I brought some money with me today, not very much, but if I have $1, I don't typically just run to the bank to deposit it. Maybe you do. But I typically start stashing cash somewhere until I have a significant amount, what I feel like is a significant amount to go deposit. And maybe that's 50, maybe it's 100, maybe it's more than that. But we don't run to the bank every time we just have a few dollars to deposit. And I don't know what happens at your house, but at my house, the envelope where that money is kind of gets cheated from. You know, you go and borrow a little bit to pay the neighbor kid for letting your dog out or to pay the babysitter, and before you know it, that envelope is empty and that money has just kind of disappeared. Because we tend to wait until we can make a meaningful deposit. And I think we do the same thing with our marriages. We say, oh, well, okay, we're going to schedule a date night, or we're going to schedule a weekend getaway. But because of the soccer schedule and the school schedule and the kids getting sick, like, it never happens. And so what happens is, instead of putting in $20 or $50, you end up putting in $0. And so what I want to do today is I want to give you some super simple steps that you can take when you don't feel like you have anything to give. And so we're going to think about these as $1 deposits into our marriage, okay? So let's go through a few. The first deposit that you can make is to decide to do one thing. First is deciding to do something. That's making a deposit into your marriage, and we're going to use this jar as our example here. Now, $1, nobody's getting too excited about that $1. Okay? If I asked you who wants this jar, you'd be like, yeah, I'll take it, but if somebody else really wants it, that's fine too. Okay? Not a lot of motivation here. But the first thing you can do is decide to do one thing. Because the way out of apathy is to take one small step, even when you don't feel like it. To say to yourself, I don't feel like doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Number 2, to pray for your marriage every day in just one sentence. You can do that. You don't have to sit down for 10 or 15 minutes and journal and write out a long prayer, but in your head every morning, every nap time, whatever it is in your day, set a reminder on your phone. Pray for your marriage in one sentence. And that's another $1 deposit into your marriage. Pray that God would give you a desire to invest in your marriage. Pray for your emotions to follow as you do something even before you feel like doing it. Number 3, focus on being thankful for one thing that your husband does for your family. For one thing about who he is. Tell your kids, let's think about this. What are we thankful for? What does Dad do for us? You can find something to choose to be thankful for. I want to show you this illustration quickly because I think it makes a powerful point. I want you to look at this picture for a minute. And I'm going to give you a few seconds, and I just want you to notice in that picture everything that's red, okay? So I'm going to give you 8 seconds, okay? Go. Everything that's red. All right, now I want you to close your eyes for a second. It's not going to be long. I want you to just close your eyes for a minute, and I want you to think about everything in the picture that you could remember that you noticed that's blue. It's hard, right? Okay, now open your eyes. I want you to look at that picture, and I want you to see all the things in that picture that are blue, because there's a lot. But unless you've seen this illustration before, my guess is that when you close your eyes, you couldn't remember a single thing that was blue. Am I right? It's because you weren't looking for it. We notice what we look for. And sometimes what happens with our husbands is we notice something that is frustrating or annoying or irritating, and we begin to look for it. Or maybe you don't even have to look for it. Have you ever maybe bought a new car or a new item, and all of a sudden you begin to see it everywhere? Right? You weren't really even looking for it, but you begin to notice it. And that's what happens with our husbands. We can find what we're looking for. We just have to notice it. We have to begin to look for it. Ashley and Dino Petrone, who wrote Designed to Last, said this. I think it's really powerful. It says, you can usually change the entire dynamic of your marriage by focusing on what you most cherish about your spouse and giving voice to it. Now, some of you are at the place where you're like, there's nothing I cherish. I'm at the end, and I can't think of one thing that I would cherish. I want you to try to take a step back, and I want you to try to notice. Maybe you need to think back to earlier days in your marriage, because I guarantee you at one point there was something that you cherished. Go back and find that. Begin to notice it. Begin to speak that to your husband and make that $1 deposit. Number 4, engage with your husband in one simple way. Now, I'm not talking about date nights. I'm not talking about weekends away. I'm talking about maybe just sit next to him on the couch while you watch TV. Tell him one thing that you appreciate about him. Say thank you for one thing that happened. that day or that week, stop for a second and look him in the eye and truly say, how was your day? Maybe send him a text during the day that just says, thanks for being at work today. Thanks for supporting our family. Every choice you make in your relationship moves you toward health or away from it, towards oneness or towards isolation. Number 5, do one thing to repair conflict in your relationship. Just one thing. Be willing to ask for and extend forgiveness. Address conflict. Maybe not in the heat of the moment, but maybe a little while later. Say, hey, could we talk about this? I didn't mean for my words to come out like that. Tim Keller says, essential to marriage is the ability to forgive and to repent. And this requires being willing to give up wanting to be in control. That's hard for us. I want you to think back to week 1 when we talked about pride, and we talked about how forgiveness is a vertical commitment first between you and God. It's committing to trust him through the situation. It's committing to trust him with your hurt. It's committing to trust him to bring justice. And then it's a horizontal transaction, because we can't do the horizontal transaction without God's grace in our lives. We don't have that power on our own. But you can begin to forgive horizontally because God has trusted you and given you that ability by filling you with his grace. And so it's not dependent on you. This is hard, guys. I'm not saying this is easy. But this is God's plan. This is his way. Because if we go back to the purpose of marriage that we talked about in our first week, it's to reflect God. It's to be an image of the gospel in our lives and to the people around us. And when we allow God to have his way in these hard situations in our marriage, it reflects his character, his love, his patience, his selflessness, his kindness. Tim Keller says marriage is painful and it's wonderful because it reflects the gospel that is both painful and wonderful all at once. And so if you're feeling the painful and you're feeling at times the wonderful, know that those two things are not mutually exclusive. They go together because they're a reflection of the gospel. And we have to decide that our marriage is worth it because of the gospel and not just because of our feelings. Marriage is not always love and happiness. It is about holiness, and it takes work. It isn't cheap. Just like investing money in your savings account is a sacrifice, investing in your marriage is as well. And it's easy to forget that. It's easy for us to just drift back to our happiness, our comfort, and our desires. And then when we don't feel happy, when we don't feel in love, we come to the conclusion that our marriage has run its course, or we've married the wrong person, and we give up. Now, I don't want you to mishear me. There are times that a marriage is unhealthy, and there are biblical grounds to end that marriage. That's not what we're talking about today. But what I want you to hear today is just that because you hit a season that feels dry doesn't mean that it's the end. You can and you will fall in and out of love with your husband. Now, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but it's true. And I want you to hear that, and I want you to know that. And marriage consists of you falling in and out of love, but choosing to stay together, because love's not just about feelings. Love is about a commitment and a choice. I'm getting sidetracked here. I don't want you to let those hard seasons convince you that you made a mistake. I want you to know that if you put in the work, if you seek God together, you can come out on the other side of that difficult season. Romans 12:9-10, let me kind of start to wrap up here. Romans 12:9-10 says, let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil and hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection and outdo one another in showing honor. Marshall Siegel says this in a blog that he wrote for Desiring God. It says, we probably need to be reminded that marriage is less about compatibility than commitment. After all, there has never been a less compatible relationship than a holy God and his sinful bride. And that's the mold that we're aiming for in our marriages. We can't do any of this without God's work in our heart. And so I just want to encourage you today to start making $1 deposit into your marriage today. And as you do that, that investment doesn't seem like much, but over time, what will happen is you've accumulated all of this relational capital, and your marriage will be a rich place for you to be. But it takes making those investments. Let me pray for us. God, thank you that you are a holy God who pursues us, a broken and sinful people. God, there's no other religion in the world, there's no other relationship like that can be found anywhere in the world. And I thank you that we can have a personal relationship with you, the God and the creator of the universe. God, I pray today for the marriages that are represented in this room. For my marriage, for these leaders' marriages, for every woman that's in here, God. Would you give her the courage and the determination and the will, God, not in our own power, but in yours, to just begin to make $1 deposits every day into our marriage, God. Don't let us be fooled that we have to wait until we can make a $100 deposit. But would you just show us how to make little deposits every day into our relationship, God? I pray for marriages that are on the brink. Would you give them the courage to just tell someone, to invite someone into that journey, God? And most of all, to look to you. God, we love you and praise you, and we just thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.